Wait, where are we fighting at? The average game of Apex Legends, or hell, most multiplayer shooters, are played out on iconic maps. But we often don't slow down enough to really look at them. But it's not like we don't look at them. I mean, we all don't want to play on ugly gray boxes all day. Okay, except for these guys, but outside of them, we still appreciate the art and design that goes into the maps we play. What we don't do, though, is really look at them. The tiny details. The ones that are so inconsequential that missing them never really affects your enjoyment of a game. Frankly, you can spend your entire lifetime missing every little detail on these maps and still appreciate them for the greatness that they are. But we're gonna look at them anyways because they can be pretty cool. Real quick, I want to say that this video was inspired by the work of N.E. Austin.
I'm standing here up to my thighs in digital water.
If you enjoy content like this, make sure to check them out. For today, we're going to kick off this exploration with the first ever map in Apex, Kings Canyon. Kings Canyon is a region formerly known as an IMC military base and research outpost on the planet of Solus. After being abandoned by the IMC, it later was repurposed into the first ever arena for the Apex games. Its history as a military base gives us a ton of fun militaristic spaces to look around in. But to start with, we'll be going to the southeastern corner of the map in the base known as the Repulsor Station. This location is the IMC base that manages the, well, repulsor for the entire region. This giant antenna-looking thing is actually the tool the IMC used to prevent the wildlife of Kings Canyon from treading through their facilities. That seems like quite the dick move from them to do, but with guys like these hanging around, I understand why they'd want to protect it. The structure underneath the antenna is the base that holds it all together. This machine, being so big, requires a set of hydraulics to hold it upright. And those hydraulics have to be bolted into the ground and cast in cement to keep it from falling over. This is a really cool detail to show how they handled keeping the repulsor upright, and it isn't so incredibly off from how something like a wind turbine would be built, even if it's a little over-engineered. The repulsor did make me wonder how the operation was powered though, and that led me to these orbs at the center of the base. Initially, I thought these were some kind of fuel reserves stored for the entire base, but when I got up close, I heard this. If I really had to guess, I'd say that this is some form of canister for a gas or liquid used in the generators nearby. That or a nuclear containment structure, and I sure hope it isn't the second. The other interesting thing about the power not only here, but all over Kings Canyon is the abundance of solar panels all across the poles on the map. It seems like instead of having the light fixtures on KC all connected to a power grid, they decided to connect each one to its own solar power instead. It probably would have helped a bit if they were all pointed towards the sun, though. It seems whichever worker installed them decided to spin a wheel for which direction each should face. The rest of the facility includes some mobile artillery hangars that would be used to repair the vehicles that come through, as well as a landing pad on the outside for anyone flying in to be able to get to the base. This repulsor base is also one of two on the map, the other one being artillery on the far north. You can tell they are connected to thanks to the markings on the base itself. The number 82 is used to mark these facilities, with other numbers scattered around the smaller military facilities across the map. Most of these buildings are the same layouts in different places, but each area has their own number to go off of. Speaking of signage, these signs inside of a few of the storage buildings were fascinating to look at. They warn of what looks like falling cubes from the ceiling, which really makes me wonder about the build quality of these structures when I look up to see what's above me. On the map, we have 4 other major military structures. The airbase is one that features 2 airships for ships to take off from and a lot, and I mean a lot, of storage. It also houses an air traffic control tower which would have been managing any inbound or outgoing flights from the bases. The next one we can look at is Artillery Battery, which is the most northern base on the map. And it houses the artillery. Look, I don't know what to tell you, the IMC were very upfront with their names. This base features the primary defense for the entirety of Kings Canyon, namely these giant anti-air weapons stationed around the perimeter. There's actually a few smaller ones set up at the airbase as well. If any aircrafts got past these giant things, you'd want an additional defense around important locations like where the aircrafts come from, and it's a neat touch to show how the IMC would have prioritized the protection of their facilities. The artillery battery also includes a different building built into the side of the mountain itself, and just as true to its name, this wall was the primary storage for all of the munitions used by the IMC. we can find not only the missiles used by the AA guns, but also crates and boxes of small arms munitions too. Most people probably didn't even notice the tunnel at the back end of this room that leads to some other part of the IMC's sprawling facilities. But it seems to have collapsed long before we got here. I checked behind it, and I couldn't quite tell where it was supposed to lead, either to something deeper into the mountains itself, or possibly down into the underground facilities we'll talk about later. This tunnel and area doesn't exist anymore anyways, because in Season 8, they blew it up. Yeah, just, bam, yeah. Speaking of the defenses on artillery though, it's surprising that no such defenses seem to be around the IMC's main form of power generation, the hydro dam. This facility is connected directly with the repulsor base and looks to me like it would have been the primary source of power for machines such as this. You have pipelines that feed the pumped water into the turbine to create the energy, with the wastewater dumped into the ground below. I personally think that you should have at least like one AA gun protecting this area. I mean, if they destroy this, it's no power. You know what I mean? Like, am I wrong in saying this? Like, I feel like I'm the only one thinking about this. Either way, the indoor area of the dam shows us more of the generators that are probably used to run the pipeline or where all the energy created from the dam is processed. The interesting thing for me was these things. These giant chemical canisters that are stacked up at the bottom. Seeing these made me wonder what they were used for and whether it had some significance in the hydro dam. But I had a hard time reading the signage on the canisters, so I decided to put it to the side for now. To keep things moving along, we have one other major military facility here in Kings Canyon, and that is the Interstellar Relay, the main communications outpost of KC. There's a fun little detail here where the nearby waterfall was disrupting the construction of the buildings nearby. So they diverted the water flow of the water to 2 different points, so that it would fall off the cliffside without bothering them. In fact, looking at the water above, I've actually wondered, where does the water in KC come from? It has to come from somewhere, and most likely it's from the mountain. So I flew up the mountain and found this. A giant pool that seems to flow for most of the water that comes through Kings Canyon. It doesn't have a full direct point of exit into the canyon itself, but watching where it flows, it looks like it goes down into the mountain further and then pops out in 2 different spaces. One filling up this extra pool over by Relay, and one that connects to the main canyon itself. I'm sure many of you have actually seen this pool before when you fly over the map of KC, but it's not actually a playable space. It's just kinda here, and that's pretty evident from how nice it looks. Going back to Relay though, the other fascinating thing about it is the center of the main dish. This big space with generators and crates throughout, which has a loading bay marked on it? What is this here for? I thought maybe it would make sense if the dishes required constant upkeep, but there also weren't any vehicle entrances to the bay. Not to mention, where does this loading bay go? That's when it hit me. No, not literally, oh! I haven't really mentioned it yet, but Kings Canyon is home to different research facilities that the IMC ran in their time on the frontier, including Project Wraith, which was the IMC's first attempt into phase technology, and where Wraith originated. KC also housed the Simulacrum facility where research and development into Revenant was conducted. Both of these sites were buried after the IMC's departure, with the labs eventually resurfacing as a new place for the Apex games to compete in. While the Simulacrum facility, well, it went out with a bang. Actually, why does every change to an Apex map happen because something blew up? Now, all of these research facilities, regardless of their blowing up status, needed ways of getting equipment and supplies down there. So, follow me on this. What if the IMC made a more discreet entrance into their secret research stations that required all of the cargo heading in to be brought in on foot, with an elevator running down into the underground where the research teams could collect them? Okay, yeah, it's just a random loading bay, but half the fun of exploring these spaces anyways is coming up with ideas on how they were used. So if you don't agree with me, I don't know, go make up your own conclusion. You're just as valid as I am. We still have a set of military compounds to look at, and those are the watchtowers. There are 2 of these watchtowers, north and south, and they're arguably the most defining features on the map, sticking out above 2 very common points of action. Looking around the outside, there isn't too much to speak of, but the zip line leading up to it actually tells us more than I initially thought. You see this? This is an elevator shaft. Pointing out the obvious. Check. But despite that, I believe these watchtowers served actually one of 2 things. And one of them was being a lift to the higher levels of the canyon, allowing personnel and cargo to go up these lifts to skip the giant uphill most of the bases stand on. The trucks just outside help show how they delivered the crates to lift up to the top end. So I'd imagine these were important locations for the logistics of all the operations ongoing here. But on top of that, these watchtowers probably held the double purpose of being the surveillance sites for the entire region. Going inside the small rooms on the side of the towers shows server rooms fully intact inside. And the main rooms have tables with what looks to be electronics built in for the equipment to plug into. Pairing those alongside the monitors on the main deck and the surveillance signs, we can get a pretty good idea that this was where they monitored all the activity in the canyon, which for me gives a pretty clear picture on how the IMC fully ran and operated Kings Canyon. It may just feel like a random smattering of military buildings, but there was genuine thought into where they were placed and what they would have been used for. And I think that's really cool to see. There are also a lot of smaller buildings scattered around that are reminiscent of the military design. And it gives me a moment to talk about the fact that many of the buildings on Kings Canyon are actually repurposed assets from the Titanfall games. Nearly every building or prop you find on the map is something you can find from an old Titanfall or Titanfall 2 map. I have an entire KC history video that talks the details of it with the lead designer, but in short, the development time for Apex Legends was so incredibly small that they decided to create an asset palette out of older props to make it easier to develop the first map. And I honestly couldn't even tell until I was told, because they've been reused in such a fun and unique way. I especially like these small buildings that show the IMC's smaller spread across the map, with the vents and generators to manage the small buildings on their own. Okay, I'm sorry, but what is this thing? I can't stop myself. I have to know, what are the IMC doing with these giant canisters of chemicals? It can't be oxygen because we're breathing. And it hardly feels necessary to store water in these, not to mention they are found not only at the dam, but also connected to the isolated buildings all across the map. So what are they, and what do they do? I kind of went into a bit of a rabbit hole after this. Most of the signs on the canisters were blurred here, but after getting high resolution textures, we could see what the signage was. You'd be surprised to find that the signs on here are actually real signs used for chemicals. The orange sign here is a general hazard class sign, marking the chemical inside as a flammable gas. The fire marker tells us it's flammable, while the 2 underneath tells us it's a gas. Change that number to a 3 and it would be a liquid. Okay, that makes things a little easier. We also have one more sign on it. This sign right here. If you don't know, this sign is an NFPA 704 hazard sign, used by firefighters to identify the danger of a chemical in the event of a leak or fire or what have you. Every chemical has its own ratings based on the 4 criteria. Each of the colored diamonds represents a different hazard, with a number marking the level of severity. The blue diamond marks the health hazard, and our chemical here has a health hazard rating of 1. This means that this chemical would be at most an irritant and would cause minor injuries if left exposed to it. Next up is the fire hazard rating in red, which for us is a 2. A rating of 2 tells us that this chemical ignites at a temperature between 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 200 degrees. Finally, we have the reactivity in yellow, or how easily this chemical can go. Our chemical being rated at a reactivity of 3 means it can very much detonate under the right conditions, but is still unlikely to detonate spontaneously. You'd have to give it a good reason. Finally, the white diamond marker is a special tab, used to mark any special qualities in the chemical. For us, our chemical is marked OXY, which is a symbol for oxidizer. So we have, in these canisters, an oxidizer that is an irritant with a moderate level of flammability that can be highly explosive if handled incorrectly. With all of this, we should be able to find the chemical by searching for an oxidizer with these ratings. I'm gonna finally figure this out. I'll be right back. What is the chemical NFPA 123? What is the chemical NFPA 123? I tried everywhere to find out what this was. I searched page after page of chemical oxidizers, but I could find 0 oxidizers that matched an NFPA rating of 1, 2, and 3. I even tried asking online to see if anybody could possibly figure it out, and that went about as well as you'd expect.
Come.
So I can't figure out what this is from its signage. Fine. What about context clues? These canisters can be found all across Kings Canyon, mostly connected to these buildings. And if we follow the connection, we can see how these canisters are used. At this point, I admitted defeat. My best guess is that this is an oxidizer used in the process of burning fuel. It wouldn't be uncommon for spacefaring ships to land at these bases and refuel here. And in fact, there are these canisters kept right underneath the landing pad at Repulsor Station. Why this oxidizer is connected to the buildings on the map, I have no idea. If anybody who is actually smart on chemical classifications could help figure out what these things are, I'd love to hear your guesses in the comments. I've spent far too long on these stupid canisters. Let's move on. The IMC did eventually leave the frontier and abandon Kings Canyon, but it's clear that people still inhabited Kings Canyon after the IMC departed. Makeshift homes have been built all across Kings Canyon, with a clear through line made between the desert residences on the west side versus the swamp ones on the east. All of the swamp buildings look to be made in ways to handle rising water levels. Some of the houses built are raised above the ground, while others look built to float on the water should it rise above them. It's also interesting to see a lot more uses of natural materials on the swamp side of KC, as things like wood were more easy to come by and maintain here. But over in the desert side, we see a lot more dense man-made material to combat the harsh environment. But I actually believe that a lot of the desert residences we see around KC are leftover remnants of the military compounds in the area. This is backed up by one location known as the Thunderdome, an arena where blood sports in the frontier originally started as an IMC fighting ground to allow the soldiers to let off some steam. This arena has been around forever and was even televised for a while as shown in Ballistics lore. So this entire area of semi-urban buildings all gathered around this arena for what had been decades. Skulltown in particular is a fascinating one since the town itself was built underneath the skeleton of a giant leviathan. You can find the supports they used to keep the skeletons from falling onto the structures below. The Leviathan itself, I'm not too sure about. Its size doesn't quite match the size of the Leviathans outside the map, so either this is a larger ancestor of these giant fellas, or something else entirely. But since this is a small civilization that formed here, we can get a better idea of how things worked for them based off of the nearby Center for Commerce. The Night Market, a fully indoor facility with a ton of different stalls for merchants to sell their wares in. There is a marked management office, a few full outlets for businesses, and the rest of the space is used for stalls that can be refitted to whatever was needed. Want some solar cola? Well, make sure to grab some from the vending machines around the market, all of them being in Korean. I haven't mentioned it, but I find it pretty cool that we can see signs of Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, and I believe a few other languages all over the maps in Apex. It really gives the world of Apex and Titanfall this unique blend of cultures and shows how Respawn wears the inspiration of their designs on their sleeves. But outside of that, this is just a vending machine. Let's look at the other outlets. We have Alaya's General Goods for all of your common household needs. Cliff's Meat Market for any deli or butcher meat you may require. Asher's Frozen Foods for your Hot Pockets. And Kiera's Leviathan... Oh no. There are two other major sites on Kings Canyon I have yet to mention, and those are the water treatment facilities, one in the south and one in the north. These facilities are not actually run by the IMC, but instead by the company Ingot Filtration Systems, who seem to have been hired and brought in by the IMC to manage the water treatment for the region. Their two water treatment plants also connect directly with the two biggest towns in KC. But what I find most fascinating about the ingot plants aren't the plants themselves, but how they were placed. You see, this water treatment plant near Skulltown is unassuming enough. You'd imagine most of the employees would commute down here to work at the plant each day, down a normal arid dirt road. Nothing too crazy there, but if we go to the north plant, we see a very different picture with the nearby town of Slum Lakes. An entire town built on a dried up lake bed. The vibes from Skulltown to here feel so incredibly different, with garbage piled up in every corner as well as mud and muck spread everywhere you walk. And that's partly because this place is directly built into the runoff line for the water treatment plant. The entire plant is literally called Runoff. These slums are the dump for all the leftovers from the plant. I can just imagine it. Working at the main facility, spending 1 minute more than my company allotted bathroom break allows, and being sent to the Slum Lakes facility as punishment. My God, this place sucks. Outside of that, I don't have much else to say here other than... What? Don't look at me like that! Fine, we'll move on. There are a lot of other areas on the map, including some military sites like Bunker, but I don't really have any immediate thoughts on them as I looked around. Not to mention I haven't even covered the updated versions of the map. I would take the time to check them again, but you can see the runtime of this video already. But there is one other detail that most people do know, but is always fun to check out. If you don't know, there is a fun little Easter egg on the map where if you find and shoot a series of Nessies scattered across the map in the correct order, you'll find a special surprise waiting for you at the swamps. And that's about it. There's something different about walking around Kings Canyon alone. Apex maps are usually constantly filled with something happening. Gunshots in the distance, explosions worthy of a Michael Bay film, or even just the constant closing of the ring that always keeps you focused on the game you're playing. So when these maps are suddenly so quiet, it feels off, but not in a bad way. This is the eventual endpoint for practically every multiplayer map in gaming. There will come a day where the player base for a game will move on, and the maps in them will grow quiet. The only knowledge of the action once played on them lived on in our memories. And when that day eventually comes for Apex, this is what Kings Canyon will look like. And it's actually a little nice to stand here and appreciate the work that the creators of this map put in. If you enjoy looking over maps like these for the little details, make sure to let me know, and I can do more in the future. For now, I'm gonna relax and just enjoy this map. Tell me your secrets, you annoying little chemical bastard!